The email arrived at 10:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when small mistakes slide into your life and pretend they're harmless. Subject: monthly e-statement, Northbridge Savings. The sender looked legitimate, the footer matched. The bank's real address and the PDF attachment wasn't the sloppy kind of phishing. I almost deleted it. I almost brushed it off as a glitch. But curiosity is a stubborn flame. I tapped it open and my breath lodged halfway in my chest. Account holder, H. Rahim, my husband. The statement scrolled past in neat rows of numbers. And banal labels, utilities, groceries, school fund, the same words I typed into our joint budget every month, except these entries didn't live in our joint account. They lived elsewhere on a separate island I never knew existed. I placed the phone face down on the table and listened to the boiler humming like a tired animal. The apartment you only notice when you're looking for a place to put your shock. When Hadar came home, he kissed my forehead, complained about traffic, and asked if there was tea. I made it. I smiled. I said nothing. And in that choice to say nothing, I felt some quiet, unfamiliar part of me stand up. We'd been married. 5 years then. The early years were soft focus photos, road trips, Saturday markets, greasy fingers, and shared jokes. A growing collection of mismatched mugs. He was the planner, the numbers person. I was the color and typography and keep everything in a folder person. My freelance design work gave me flexible hours and a belief that our life, like any layout, could be rearranged until it felt right. It made sense that he took the lead on long-term investments, that I tracked month to month. The day it didn't. That night, while he showered, I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote 3 rules in slow, careful handwriting. 1. Don't confront. 2. Don't break the law. 3. Don't assume collect proof. The rules were a small, stubborn raft in churning water. Printed the PDF. I built a folder on my laptop with a name that would have meant nothing to anyone but me. Rain plan. The next morning, I downloaded 12 months of our joint account statements and laid them beside the Northbridge statement like 2 pieces of a puzzle. I didn't want to admit they fit. That's when the pattern stepped forward, shameless and tidy. On the 7th, the 15th, the 28th, small transfers left our joint account toward ambiguous-sounding billers. The same days appeared on the Northbridge credits with new names transfers. In, labeled utilities and groceries, as if those words were uniforms. The reference field on one deposit read Evergreen 704 PB, didn't belong in our life. Evergreens were a line in a song, a tree in winter, a color swatch, not a code. I typed it into a search bar. Evergreen Heights returned new construction. Brassy brochures, staged living rooms with 2 white couches. Unit 704 danced in my eyes. My throat felt tight and metallic. Whether this was an investment, a hideaway, or a shrine to someone else, I wasn't going to be the last to know, simply because I was the last to shout. I shut the laptop and reached for my keys. Evergreen Heights stood behind silver gates in a glossy marketing office. Inside, a woman in a navy blazer handed me a brochure before I could ask. "Are you looking to buy?" she asked, smiling like a promise. "Just exploring," I said. "How's Unit 704? Her eyebrows lifted and lowered so fast it felt like a blink. "Good unit," she said smoothly. "Token paid." "Documentation pending." My fingers tightened around the brochure. "Booked it?" It made my voice small, the way people do when they plan to disarm you with their own unimportance. "I'm afraid I can't disclose client information," she replied with a rehearsed, kind smile. "Of course," I said, and let her speak about south-facing windows and payment plans while my mind built a timeline. Token paid, documents pending. I thanked her, walked out with my heart ringing in my ears, and sat in my car with the brochure. Face down on the passenger seat, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my notes app and typed another line. If there's a story here, I'll hear it from the truth. I told one person that week, Nita, my best friend since we were 12, and convinced we could outrun any storm as long as our shoelaces were tied tight. "Promise you won't react for me," I said, when she picked up. "Found something strange, financial. I need to understand, not explode." She listened without filling the silence, just the way I needed. Do you want my cousin's number? She asked after a moment. Ayesha, family law. She's allergic to drama and addicted to documentation. I laughed like someone who remembered how. Text it to me, I said. That night I sent Ayesha an email with a simple subject. I need to understand my rights without starting a fire. She replied within an hour. Coffee tomorrow. Bring what you have. Leave what you don't. Ayesha had a steady gaze that made you want to answer more honestly than you meant to. I laid the statements between us like contraband in a movie. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She read. Okay, she said finally, tapping the Northbridge logo with her pen. You did the most important thing first. You didn't blow it up. When people explode, money evaporates. Here's what you'll do next. Open a separate account in your name and route your freelance income there. Check your credit reports for any loans you didn't agree to. Quietly collect copies of all joint assets and insurance and tax documents. And absolutely don't hack anything. Courts care about how you got your truth. I exhaled like someone who had been holding their breath under a table, and during all this, I asked, You wait, she said. You don't. Chase him. You let the pattern come to you. Patterns are awful at hiding once you look for them. By Friday, I had a small bank account that felt like a room with a lock only I knew about. I pulled my credit report and found a soft inquiry by a dealership 2 neighborhoods over. The kind of place where salesmen call everyone boss. The co-borrower field read pending. I filed a freeze on my credit Saturday morning while Hadir tied his shoes and talked about a site visit out of town. I memorized the way his voice warmed when he believed he was being responsible. I'll call you when I'm back, he said, and kissed the top of my head. I held that kiss in a separate file in my mind. If love was going to fight for space with the facts, I was going to give it a room and a chair and nothing to break. The following week, I went back to Evergreen Heights and spoke to a different agent who smelled like mint gum and indecision. Any news on 704? Asked, making a nice stranger small talk. Token is confirmed, he said, flipping through a clip file. You just need the Coplican ID. He glanced up and smiled. He said he might add his sister later. A sister. The word cracked against my ribs. In the dictionary of excuses, sister sits next to innocuous and across from plausible deniability. I didn't argue. I thanked him and took the elevator down, counting the floors like a spell. If this was cover if sister meant, keep it in the family and out of your wife's reach, the record would still say what it said, and someday a record would have to answer questions. Back home, I turned our dining table into an evidence board without the pins and string. Colored tabs, chronological printouts, receipts flagged and cross-referenced, the habit that made me an organized designer made me suddenly, the kind of person who could outline a life in bullet points and bank codes. And it wasn't just the apartment. 2 deposits in the secret account came from Galian Construction with vague descriptions like consultation and referral. Hadir's official job description didn't include commission. Kickbacks. Have a smell, and once you smell it, you can't call it perfume. In the margin of my notes, I wrote, if his employer asks, tell only what the filed documents show. Ayesha had warned me. Your case is your home. Let his work handle his work. The days turned slow and elastic, the way time gets when the second hand is dragging a secret. Haters started coming home later with a kind of empty brightness that people use when they want you to focus on the shine and not the shape. Client dinner, he'd say. Project secure, he'd grin. He brought me a necklace the week after, simple, elegant, wrapped in a box that clicked shut like it knew it was shutting something up. Client gift, he said, as if generosity were contagious. I held it in my palm and felt the cool, skeptical metal. I put it back in the box. I wasn't going to let anyone confuse jewelry for love or silence for agreement. At night, the apartment exhaled and the refrigerator made its sleepy sounds. I added to the rain plan. A list of small, sensible moves. Call the insurance too. Confirm beneficiaries. Let's photograph all the serial numbers of the things that matter. Scan the Nikonama and tuck a copy where it can't be misplaced. I started taking on an extra client here, a small project there. Not because I thought he'd cut me off tomorrow, but because one of Ayesha's sentences stuck to my ribs. Independence is a kind of witness, one that shows up when the others refuse. It felt less like building a wall and more like planting. A garden that would be there whether or not someone remembered to water it with you. When the out-of-town site visit came around again, I watched the Northbridge account light up with a debit to Evergreen Heights schedule B. I texted Ayesha. One word. Moving, she replied. Good. We keep collecting. 2 days later, as I refilled the sugar jar, the elevator dinged down the hall and a neighbor's door shut, and the ordinary world kept doing its extraordinary thing. Not caring about your personal tragedy at all, I dropped 1 grain of sugar and watched it disappear on the countertop. This is what secrets do. They insist on being small until they're too heavy to carry. The confrontation didn't come when you think it should have. It was Hyder who tried to stage it in his favorite room, control. He came home one evening earlier than usual with an envelope that was too crisp to be an afterthought. We should talk, he said, and I could hear the script in his voice. He sat me on the sofa like he was about to teach me something kind and painful. I think we've grown apart, he began. A small, precise anger slid into my arms like a cat. Have we? I asked quietly. He set the envelope on the coffee table and it thudded like paper doesn't when it's only paper. I'd like us to do this peacefully. No lawyers. I'll be fair. The last word hovered between us. Fair, his mouth said. As if I should be grateful he remembered the word. I stood up and went to the console where I'd tucked the rain plan file. It was thinner than his envelope and heavier. I laid it down gently beside his paper. We won't need lawyers to talk, I said, but we will need lawyers to do this right. He laughed, a small, irritated laugh. Maya, he said, and the kindness in my name had never felt less kind. Don't make this. The doorbell rang. He blinked. I opened it to a man holding a service folder. For Mr. Hayder Rahim, he said. It wasn't a movie. No one made a speech. Process server left with the elevator's closing sigh. Hyder's fingers dug in too. His envelope, pulled out the stapled stack, scanned fast, then slower. What is this? The brand new boy in his voice. It's a notice, I said softly. For an interim order to preserve our assets until we can account for them properly. I turned the file and walked him through the pages like a tour guide in a museum. This is the Northbridge account you didn't mention. These are the Evergreen payments. These are the Galian deposits. These are the transfers labeled family gift to an aunt who doesn't exist on paper. I didn't confront you when I found it because I wanted something to exist here besides my pain. He tried on 3 faces in 5 minutes. Confusion. Indignation. That pleading kind that asked you to be the woman you were when you said, I do, and not the one you had to become afterwards. It's not what you think, he said finally. Loyal to the line. It never is, I said. That's why courts exist. Because what we think and what we can prove are often not good neighbors. He leaned back as if gravity had betrayed him. His phone lit up. A calendar reminder for something that was no longer going to go the way he planned. We can fix this, he whispered in a voice I recognized from happier emergencies. We can, I said. By telling the truth? On paper, the first hearing was short and surgical. Ayesha spoke like a person who only learned words that could lift. The judge looked at the exhibit sprintouts that were simply themselves and said the sentence I'd been building toward without knowing it, until further orders. The respondent will maintain the status quo of all assets. No transfers. No encumbrances without prior intimation. Status quo is what people say when they mean do not move. It felt like the opposite of stuck. Hador's side filed a response that turned commissions into reimbursements and deliberate transfers into administrative errors. The judge didn't scowl. He didn't need to. He asked for a full disclosure of accounts, including the Northbridge savings account ending in 0612. The walls of the court held the oxygen steady while the weight of that 4-digit number landed. A week later, Evergreen Heights acknowledged. The token under Hadir's name with a polite letter that tried very hard to be about windows and not about people. Ayesha moved to freeze the unit allocation pending title adjudication. The court nodded without looking away from the file. Somewhere in the gears of Galian Construction's compliance department, someone else's heart must have started to race. Because 2 weeks after that, I got a call asking if I was willing to confirm that the documents I'd filed were indeed the documents I'd filed. Yes, I said. That's all I'm willing to confirm, Ayesha reminded me. Your case is not about ruining him at work. It's about not being ruined at home. Meanwhile, life, rude and benevolent, kept doing what it does. I met deadlines. I watered plants. I sat in therapy on Thursdays and taught my voice to stop apologizing for interrupting silence. I visited my mother for lunch and didn't tell her for now because telling is a kind of surrender, and I wasn't ready to hand this over to other people's worry. At night, I fell asleep with my hand on my own arm. Sometimes it felt like comfort, sometimes like counting. At the second hearing, Hedera stared at the wood grain of the table like it had the answers he could memorize. His lawyer, a man who made empathy sound expensive, suggested a clean break, a phrase people use when they suspect what they're cutting is going to bleed. Ayesha kept her tone measured. Equitable division of marital assets, she said, including funds concealed within the Northbridge account, based on the documented pattern appear to be commingled with marital income. Either the unit at Evergreen Heights is titled jointly, or the token is refunded and the funds are accounted for in the settlement. Interim maintenance, as per statute. Exclusive use of the matrimonial home to my client pending final orders. The judge nodded in that way. That means he can see the shape of the ending, even if the pages haven't been written yet. That evening, Hedera stood in the kitchen and watched me slice apples like a person who had forgotten how to ask for anything. Without trying to own it? Do you hate me? He asked suddenly. He always preferred the dramatic route when the straight one didn't offer applause. I set the knife down. I don't, I said. Hate would mean I want you to suffer, just to watch you suffer. I don't. I want what we built with honesty, what you built without me. I want accounted for. There's a difference. He leaned on the counter, rubbed his forehead as if the right memory might fix the present, and then left the room the way people leave when they can't carry their own noise. Over the next month, the secret account stopped being secret. That's the thing about secrets. They're only secrets because few people care, but even one person with a stamp care, and the myth evaporates. The account balance became a number on a sheet, and then a number in a draft order, and then a number that would be added to a number and turned into a fair share. Evergreen transformed, too, from a possibility looming over my head to a line item that could be either split in title or refunded and divided. The sister as complicant excuse deflated with a puzzled shrug from the builder who wanted paperwork, not stories. The dealership's inquiry on my credit expired like milk, and my freeze, invisible but strong, kept the boundaries where they belonged. There were still small cruelties. A box of photographs fell from the top shelf of our closet one afternoon, and the lid came off, and we scattered across the floor weddings we attended. Cousins' birthdays, our first apartment with its lopsided blinds. I sat with them until my knees ached, and then I put them back deliberately. Not as proof of a lie, but as proof of a life that existed alongside it. In therapy, I said, I feel like I should be angrier, my therapist asked. What would that change? I realized then that I had been waiting for anger to justify my actions, as if quiet certainty needed a costume's change to be allowed on stage. It didn't. It was enough to know that my weight had turned into a spine. The day Galleon placed Hedera on administrative leave, he came home early with silence clinging to his collar. It's because of you, he said low. Wasn't a question. It's because of what you did, I corrected gently. Because of the documents that show it. He opened his mouth and then closed it, with the kind of dignity people choose when they realize they've run out of performances. Ate separately that night. I listened to the apartment settle and imagined the building as a body that had taken along. Deep breaths, some parts injured, all parts alive. Settlement conferences are nothing like TV. No one flips tables. Mostly, they flip through calendars. We sat in a room the color of waiting, while lawyers turned words into edges that wouldn't cut the wrong person. Numbers became bridges and sometimes barriers. Ayesha slid a spreadsheet across the table, each row a small truth that, together, refused to be called a misunderstanding. Hadera's lawyer countered with proposals that were more stage management than math. The judge eventually stepped in and did what judges do when the play runs too long. Drew a line and a conclusion. We walked out with a draft that said what needed to be said. I would have exclusive use of our home until final orders. The funds in the Northbridge account would be divided as marital property. The Evergreen token would either be refunded and divided, or, if he insisted on keeping it, would require a joint title with my interests secured in equal share. Interim maintenance would be paid promptly, and all future transfers would be pre-notified. It was neither a victory parade nor a funeral procession. It felt like a key. I took a breath I didn't know I'd been saving. People think the story ends there, with a signature and a judge's nod. It doesn't. It ends in smaller rooms. In the way you hold your own hand when you sleep alone the first night, that truly feels like alone and not like waiting. It ends in the rhythm of waking up to light and saying out loud to no one, coffee, and feeling the word choose you back. It ends when you take the necklace out of the drawer and decide not to throw it away, because you won't let it become the thing he meant it to. Be a hush. You let it be a chapter marker instead. Sometimes I hold it and think about how every choice we made was just our past brushing up against our future and asking to be understood. If you want the big lessons, they're small. Waiting didn't fix anything. It didn't heal me. It didn't punish him. It gave me time to gather the truth and hold it still long enough that other people could see it. Waiting was the difference between a late-night fight and a court order. Between yelling at a story I didn't fully know and placing the story on a table where it had to explain itself. Sometimes, when I sit on the balcony and watch the rain undo itself on the city, I remember that night the email, the boiler hum, the way the apartment seemed to lean forward to listen. I remind myself of the woman I had to become to not shatter on contact. Friends asked me later, weren't you tempted to look through his phone? To follow him? Of course I was. Temptation is cheap and it sells quick. But I chose the slow, expensive thing, admissible truth. There was a day I almost cracked. He had left his phone unlocked on the counter, screen winking. I stood there, my finger hovering like a small, treacherous bird. Then I put it down. I opened the fridge and ate strawberries with my hands. One, then one more, each an act of stepping back into the person I wanted to live with after this was done. Me. The final order came down 6 months after the email. It wasn't dramatic. Paper never is, not in the moment. The house was mine to occupy. The accounts were sorted. A Evergreen unit. He opted to refund the token rather than entangle us in title. And the funds slid into the column that became my share. Fair, because it had to be. Maintenance began arriving as numbers with the correct names beside them. Galleon made its decision about him separately, and whatever that meant for his career, it was his to carry. When he came to collect his things, he stood in the doorway, like a man who had discovered that doors also open outward. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said. It didn't sound like a performance. It sounded like tired truth, late to the party, and still worth hearing. I know, I said, and the sentence behaved itself, not trying to be more than it was. One morning, weeks after the last lawyer's email, I made tea and sat on the floor with my back against the couch and the rain plan file open beside me. I flipped through, page by page, the way you read an old book and find your pencil marks and wonder who you were when you wrote them. I took the top sheet, the printed e-statement that started everything, and slid it into a new folder. It was labeled in my slow, careful handwriting, resolved. I thought about sending Ayesha flowers. I thought about sending Nita a voice note of nothing but laughter. I did both, then I texted myself, a habit I'd started during those months. When I needed another voice and was learning how to be mine, you did it without becoming someone you wouldn't respect. I don't pretend this is a template. I won't tell anyone to wait if they're in danger. Sometimes the bravest thing is to slam a door and call a friend at midnight and leave with no plan except leaving. But I will say this. If you're safe, if you can gather the truth, put it in writing. Let time be on your side for once. Sometimes the story you're in will finally have to stop pretending it's not a story and read itself out loud. And sometimes, like me, you might sit on your balcony, watching the weather decide what kind of afternoon it wants to be, and hear yourself say, with a kind of quiet that feels like a cathedral, I'm glad I waited because I am. Not because waiting was noble or cinematic, but because the patient version of me wrote the ending the furious version never could. I didn't set his life on fire. I set my boundaries on paper. And in the end, paper is very bad at lying. I still pass by. Evergreen Heights, sometimes on my way to a client meeting. The building is almost done now. Glass catching sky in the way that makes people stop and see their own reflections for a second longer than they mean to. I park at a red light and watch the windows hold clouds and think about rooms we almost live in. I drive on.